In Chapter 5, we're going to be looking at the situational approach, a little bit more complex than the previous approaches that we've looked at leadership with. So let's start off with a summary of this situational leadership. And a summary statement would be that leaders should match their style, their leadership style, the degree to which they're task-oriented, the degree to which they're relationship-oriented, to the competence and commitment of the subordinates. So this situational approach, specifically the theory situational leadership, focuses on choosing a leadership style appropriate for the situation. Now that's the really good part that everybody agrees is really true. We're going to see later that some of the details of this theory are still kind of controversial, but the idea that a leader needs to choose his or her leadership style in function of the situation is the big idea that everyone agrees on. So let's see what I mean by this. Now, one of the interesting things about this is that this one specific theory, situational leadership by Hersey and Blanchard, is used extensively in organizational leadership training and development. And there's seminars, and Ken Blanchard will come out and do seminars and present this as like the best thing since sliced bread. That doesn't necessarily mean that it always works, and we'll see what some of the limitations are here. Okay, so let's make sure that we understand what's going on here. So we're starting off with leadership style, and that's the behavior pattern of an individual who attempts to influence others. And as we saw last time, that this behavioral pattern includes two big groups of categories. Task behaviors, where you're concerned about getting the task done, getting the job done, and relationship behaviors, where you're concerned about people. And in this one specific version of the situational approach called situational leadership, it focuses especially on directive behaviors, where you're telling people what to do, and supportive behaviors, where you're trying to support and encourage people. So the one specific theory in this group of approaches that we're looking at focuses on one specific task behavior, that is directive behaviors, and relationship behaviors generally are all the relationship behaviors that are supportive. So here is the diagram that's used in this model called situational leadership, or situational leadership 2, because it was modified like 20 years ago or something from its original form. The first idea is that all leaders should use all four leadership styles. They should have all four leadership styles available to them, and they're called S1 to S4. And so S1 is down here, and it follows the same pattern where we've got the directive behavior, the task behavior, high over here, low over here, and then the vertical axis is supportive behavior, where it goes low to high. So in situational leadership, the leader needs to know how to use all, I almost put up 3 there, all 4 leadership styles. The first one, S1, is being highly directive, telling people what to do, and not very supportive, just telling people what to do. The second style is being highly directive and highly supportive. That's that 9-9 style that we saw in the leadership styles that was predicted to usually be the best approach. Then you can be highly supportive and without much directive. And then you can be not very supportive and not very directive. That's the S4 style. So according to situational leadership theory, the leader should be able to use all 4 of these styles according to the situation. Now, what defines the situation? Now, this is where the theory gets a little controversial. According to this theory, the style should be determined by the development levels of the followers. Now, what do I mean by a development level? A development level is defined as the degree to which subordinates have competence and commitment necessary to accomplish a given task or activity. How competent are they? How well do they know what they're supposed to be doing? And how much commitment do they have to what they're doing? And so there's 4 levels of development levels, and they're called D1 to D4. And so D1 is low competence and high commitment. And then after that comes level D2, which is some competence but low commitment. D3 is moderate to high competence because they're getting to know how to do it but low commitment. And then D4 is high commitment, high competence to high commitment. And so the developmental level of the followers is often portrayed on this scale here, and it goes from low over here, D1, low competence and high commitment, to D4, high competence and high commitment, and then you've got these moderate levels of development in between. So that's 4 developmental levels, and the theory says that based on the development level, we should choose an appropriate level of style. So for the low developmental level, it should be directing, which is highly directive and low supportive behavior. They should just be telling them what to do. You shouldn't necessarily be acting like caring and supporting, just tell them what to do. Once they've got some level of competence, according to this theory, their commitment drops, and you need to be more of a coach. You need to be highly directive and highly supportive. And then as their competence level increases, you need to go into a supporting role where you're highly supportive, but they need less direction. And then finally, you need to go into a delegating role when they're highly developed and they don't need much support and they don't need much directive. They're at the D4 level. So that's what the theory is that based on the development level of the follower, you should make this appropriate supportive, this appropriate leadership style, having various degrees of directive behavior and supportive behavior. And so you look at, so the way that this works, that in any given situation, the situational leader has 2 main tasks. First is diagnose the situation. And that means, in this theory, identify the developmental level of the employee. Are they at that D1, D2, D3, D4? How developed are they? You ask questions like, what is the task that these subordinates are being asked to perform? How complicated is it? What skill set do they have? Do they know how to do it? And then you also need to consider how motivated they are to do it. And then secondly, after evaluating the developmental level of the worker, your subordinate, you need to adapt your style. And so you're supposed to go to that S1 to S4 style, depending on the developmental level of the employee. Now, let's evaluate this. What are some of the strengths? First of all, one of the strengths of this is that it emphasizes leader flexibility and the need to have different styles. And that's the big idea in the situational leadership theory, is that leaders need to adapt to the situation. So the leader should change their style based on the task requirements and subordinate needs. That's really good, and it's a new idea compared to the other leadership ideas that we've had. And that's the main important piece of value to pick up from the concept of situational leadership. It also emphasizes differential treatment. Leaders need to treat each subordinate according to his or her unique needs. The leader doesn't do the same thing for everybody, but looks at the specific subordinate and figures out, what's appropriate for that person. And that is a really key idea, and it works. You can't treat everybody the same. You need to respond to people's needs in order to best take care of them, in order to get the most work out of them, in order to encourage them, and in order to do what's best for them. Now there's some semi-strengths too that are good to be aware of. First of all is that this is in style. It's got marketplace approval. Consultants often promote situational leadership as providing a credible model for training managers to become effective leaders. So this is taught in seminars all over the place. It's just a popular approach to leadership. And a second semi-strength, it's not necessarily a strength, but to some degree it is that it's clear. It clarifies when a leader should and should not act with a specific leadership style in various settings. It's understandable. You know, you might have to sit down and look at the picture and concentrate on it and try to figure out, now, why does D1 correspond to S1 and why does D2 correspond to S2? But it's eventually, when you put enough effort into it, it's pretty understandable. But there are some important criticisms to this. And a lot of these criticisms have to do with the developmental levels. In fact, the developmental levels going from D1 to D4 aren't very convincing. First of all, why should motivational levels go down when competence goes up, which is assumed in this model? And it seems like a lot of people, if not most people, when their competence goes up, they get more committed to a task because they can do it better, rather than having their motivational levels go down, meaning that they need more relational support as their competence goes up, that this model says happens. Secondly, competence levels only progress continuously, which this model assumes, for people doing routine tasks. Routine task means that you do it over and over and over again, and gradually you get better. For example, house painting. The first time you do painting, and it usually doesn't go too well. You do a little bit more painting, you get more competent. You do more and more painting, you get more and more competent, and competence increases with experience. And that's a routine task because you're basically doing the same thing over and over again, day after day, month after month. And you can see linear progress in people's skills. But that's only true for people that are doing routine tasks. A lot of people don't do routine tasks. A lot of times, for example, when you're working with technology or the job requirements are changing, things are always new and you've got to learn new things continuously. So at the beginning, you'll be not very competent when you're trying to learn a new app or when you're trying to start a new developmental process for some training program that you're working on. You'll grow in competence for a little, but when you get a new task, and you won't be competent again. For example, I just got a couple new positions as an associate editor with some journals. And I imagine I'm going to struggle with that for a while, and then after a few issues, I'll probably be a lot more competent. So even though I'm kind of like mid-career and supposedly have a lot of knowledge, I'm starting a new aspect of my career where my competence level is not going to be very high. I expect it to go up for a while and then it'll level off. Another major problem with the developmental levels is this idea of like, when are you supportive and when aren't you supportive? Most people would say that they need support from their supervisor depending on the task requirements, the relational context, and their life situation. They wouldn't say how much support they need from their supervisor depends on how committed or how competent they are. So it's not really sure that those variables necessarily relate to each other. Another criticism is that research just doesn't support the basic prescriptions of this model that in situation D1, S1 is the best situation, or that D2, S2 is the best uh, uh, leadership style to have. So research says, well, yeah, it's nice. The idea that you should have different leadership styles in different situations is good, but the prescriptions of this D1 through D4, that doesn't really seem to define when you should use those different styles. So, and another problem is that if situational leader assessments of leadership effectiveness are given, they might actually classify effective leaders as ineffective if they tend to use the same leadership style across all situations. For example, if a leader who's highly effective and they always use this high task, high relationship style, as would be predicted by the leadership styles approach, what we saw in the previous chapter, they might be quite effective because they're really concerned, they're very focused on the tasks, they get people what to do. They might be given a leadership style assessment to see if they would use different leadership styles in different situations, and they would be classified as ineffective because they only use one style that works pretty well in most situations that they've been in, but they would be classified as ineffective if they were assessed for a promotion using this assessment. So, in general, the big idea is that situational leadership is good and that we need to look at the situation to determine how we should respond and what type of leadership we should respond to. It's limited in that this one specific situational leadership theory, called situational leadership theory, it might not be very accurate in predicting when we need to have the different leadership styles. Now, at Azusa Pacific University, we're a Christian university, and we are committed to reflecting on biblical concepts in light of the material that we're looking at. And what I'd like to look at is this idea that love requires that we know and understand the situation of those whom we lead. As Christians, our top value needs to be to love and to do good to other people. And situational leadership says, yeah, you got to know the situation. And this is a biblical idea. In Philippians chapter 1, verse 9, it says, "This is my prayer, that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight." And the basis of love, doing good to others, is knowing them and having insight into their situation. I can't treat everybody the same. I've got to look at the situation that people are in and see what their needs are. I need to know the situation, and I need to know what I can do to respond. I need a deep insight that can come through God's direction, but I need to understand the situation in order to best love people, in order to do what's best for them.